Okay, guys, last chapter we did an entire chapter on Unit 9, which was on genetics. This next unit is going to be Unit 10 on human genetics. We're going to specifically focus on humans and how our heredity works. Okay, so Section 1, we're going to mostly be doing something called pedigrees, which you guys know as family trees. Okay, so if you guys remember earlier in the year when we talked about mitosis and meiosis, if you guys remember the first stage of mitosis was prophase. And during prophase, the chromatin coiled up into fully functional chromosomes. During mitosis, and only during mitosis, or meiosis I should say, scientists can take a picture of the chromosomes and they look like the picture at the bottom of the slide. Scientists can then go in, geneticists I should say specifically, can go in and they can look at this picture and they can actually print out a picture of it and they can actually cut out the chromosomes and match them together. If you guys remember, chromosomes come in pairs. We have 23 homologous pairs. You get one copy of each of the 23 pairs from mom and one copy of each of the 23 from dad. There is one exception to that, which is called the sex chromosomes, which I'm going to come back to in a second. Once the geneticist cuts out the chromosomes, they can line them up with each other, putting chromosome 1 from dad and chromosome 1 from mom together, and so on, and match up all of the pairs. We call this picture that you see on the slide called a karyotype. Genetic counselors can use this to see if there's any irregularities or any mutations that are visibly apparent just by looking at the chromosomes. Now, I want you to specifically look in the bottom right-hand corner. You will see two chromosomes that are just called X and Y. That is the 23rd pair, and those two are called the sex chromosomes. They determine an individual's sex. Okay, so 2 of the 46 chromosomes I just mentioned are called sex chromosomes. They determine your sex. Now, I'm talking about in terms of generalities. We will get into exceptions to these later on, but the general female has 2 copies of the X chromosome. There are mutations where you can have 3 copies or even 4 copies, but females have 2 X copies in general. Males, on the other hand, have 1 X chromosome and 1 Y chromosome. So our genotype would be XY. The Y chromosome has about 100 or so genes on it that the X chromosome does not. And there's a region of the Y chromosome called the SRY, or sex determining region. And basically, if a person gets the Y chromosome, the genes on that Y chromosome basically instruct the body to develop male characteristics. Okay, so every single cell in a male has 46 chromosomes, and 2 of those are the sex chromosomes, and they are the X and Y. If you're a female, every cell in your body has 46 chromosomes, and 2 of them are the X chromosomes. Again, I'm talking about in terms of generalities. There are exceptions to this. Okay, the other 44 chromosomes that are the non-sex chromosomes, we also call autosomal chromosomes. Okay, so if you guys remember these words from earlier in the year, auto means self or by itself, and soma means body. Do you guys remember somatic cells and gametes? Somatic cells were the body cells. So autosomes are basically body chromosomes. They kind of control the body, whereas the sex chromosomes control the sex of the organism. Now, I also want to be clear, the X chromosome also has a bunch of other genes on it that are necessary for life. So they don't only control sex, but that is kind of like their main function. Now, for geneticists and biologists to quickly summarize how many autosomes and sex chromosomes an individual has, biologists write humans' genotypes the following way. If you are a normal female, you have 46 chromosomes, so they write 46, and then comma, XX, which means you have 2 X chromosomes, the sex chromosomes. If you are a normal male, you also have 46 chromosomes, but you have an X and a Y chromosome. So you write your genotype 46, comma, XY. If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see a picture of the X and the Y chromosome. As you notice, the Y chromosome kind of looks deformed. It's really tiny. It's the smallest of all the chromosomes. As I said, it only contains about 100 genes. The human genome has about 20,000 or so genes, so the Y chromosome is very tiny and doesn't have much genetic information on it. Now, as you guys know, males and females are born in almost exactly a 50% ratio. This should make sense to you based on meiosis, as we learned earlier in the year. Look at the bottom picture on the slide. You see the first cell in the bottom left-hand corner, that's a male cell. It has an X and a Y chromosome. If you guys remember, during meiosis, it goes through 2 divisions. After the first division, you end up with 2 cells, and at the end of the 4th division, you end up with 4 cells. Now, if you notice, the sperm cells on the bottom right-hand side, 2 of the sperm cells carry an X chromosome, 2 of them carry a Y chromosome. So now if you look above the Punnett square, you'll notice the male on the left-hand side, one block says X, one block says Y. That means half of the sperm carry the X chromosome, half the sperm carry the Y chromosome. The female on top of the Punnett square, you can see both of her say X and X because every single every single egg carries an X chromosome. So eggs always carry a single X chromosome, whereas sperm, they have a 50-50 chance, one X or one Y. Again, I know there's always exceptions to these things. If you guys remember, there's something called non-disjunction where the chromosomes don't separate. We will come to that later on in the chapter. I'm just talking about in terms of general normal cases. So this is why when a man and a woman have a baby, there's a 50% chance to produce XX and a 50% chance to produce XY. Okay, so gametes always have 23 chromosomes. Remember, they're haploid, half the normal number of chromosomes. 22 of those are the autosomes, and the last one, the 23rd one, is the sex chromosome, either an X or a Y. Now, last chapter we learned about Gregor Mendel's pea plants and his genetic laws that he came up with. Human inheritance follows these same patterns. Humans are a little bit more complicated than peas, but we can still apply Mendelian genetics to humans. But the problem is we can really only use Mendelian genetics when we're talking about traits that are controlled by a single gene. A lot of your traits like hair color, eye color, skin color, and so on, they're controlled by many different genes all working together to influence a trait. We're going to try to find traits that are controlled by one gene. Okay, so first thing a biologist has to do is they have to kind of rule out the environmental influences. Like think back to the pea plants. Pea plants that were given better soil or more water or more sunlight are going to grow taller. So genes are not the only thing that control your phenotype. The environment plays a huge role. So biologists have to first kind of rule out the environmental impacts, and then they have to figure out how these traits get passed from one generation to the next. Okay, so to do this, we're going to use what's called a pedigree, which you guys probably call a family tree. Pedigrees show relationships, specifically, well, most importantly, genetic relationships within a family. Genetic counselors can analyze pedigree charts to infer or figure out the genotypes of certain family members, even if they don't do genetic testing on them. Now, I want you to keep in mind that pedigrees don't always give you an exact pattern inheritance, because they could be influenced by the environment, they could be influenced by multiple different genes, but we're going to tend to look at simple examples where we can figure out the pattern of inheritance. Okay, so when you make a pedigree, it's going to look like the one in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. Circles are going to represent females, and squares are going to represent males. Now, as you notice, some of the shapes are shaded in. A shaded in figure, or shape I should say, represents that organism expresses that trait. Each time you make a pedigree, you're going to be specifically talking about one trait. So let's just make an example. I'm just totally making this up right now. Let's say we're talking about color blindness. If you look at letters D, H, and K, they're all shaded in. That would mean that those 3 individuals are colorblind. Okay, now the people that are not shaded, like B, F, G, I, and J, they do not express that trait, meaning in my example, they're not colorblind. Okay, and then if you notice letters A and C, they are half shaded. We're going to call those people carriers, specifically carriers of a recessive allele, meaning they're heterozygous. So they carry on one of their 2 chromosomes the recessive trait, but they don't express it because it's recessive. They have one dominant and one recessive allele, so they don't express it, but they are carriers, which means they could potentially pass it on to their children. Okay, now if you notice some of the shapes are connected by a horizontal line, which means left to right. Like look at the top of the picture, there's a circle and a square connected by a horizontal line. That means that those 2 people are either married or that they are parents. Now, I'm not always talking about marriage like in terms of the government. It could just mean they're a couple. Now, if there's a vertical line which connects the parents to other shapes, those are the offspring. So if you look at the couple at the very top of the tree, the circle and the square, they have 3 kids. They have 1 male and they have 2 female daughters. Now, the male is married to a female, and the third female, or I should say the second female, the third child, is married to a man. The middle child, the girl in the middle, she's not married. She does not have a mate at the moment. And then you can see there's a 3rd generation down. Those will be the grandkids of the original parents at the top of the tree. Now, some traits, as you guys learned from last chapter, are dominant, and some of them are recessive. Just by looking at a pedigree chart, you can tell whether the trait is dominant or recessive. Look at the tree in the bottom left-hand corner. If you notice there's shaded individuals in generation 1, 2, and 3. That means this trait is a dominant trait since it is found in each generation. Now, recessive traits, as you guys hopefully saw last chapter with Gregor Mendel, they can skip generations. So look at the tree in the bottom right-hand corner. Notice generation 2 does not have any shaded individuals. That means that trait is recessive. It skipped the generation, but it came back in generation 3. Okay, so if it's missing in one generation, we're going to consider it recessive. If it's found in every generation, we're going to consider it dominant. Okay, one of your assignments this week is going to get some practice drawing these pedigree charts. Please watch my YouTube video where I do a couple of them with you, and then I want you guys to get a chance to draw them and label them. Later on this chapter, we're going to analyze them and figure out people's genotypes based on the pedigree chart.